brainiacs and practitioners, welcome back to this thing of ours and another episode of the Chronicles of Gameology. I'm your host, Neil K. Marcellus, and yeah, that's checkmate. You know, there's a recurring message that I re-emphasize quite often on this channel that speaks to the genesis and the origin story of exactly why I refer to this concept called game as being a street philosophy and also a street discipline. And as I have said on other occasions and other episodes, this concept called game comes from street knowledge. And street knowledge is directly related to one being shrewdly aware of how to survive and be successful in any situation as a result of thriving and being successful in no-nonsense environments like the streets. One of the many benefits and perks that comes from being baptized by fire, being shot through the pressure to gain sink or swim crucible, is that you come to realize that knowledge can only be brought about from what is called the 3 C's, which is coherence, correspondence, and what is consequential. Also, this is why the mere accumulation of data and information doesn't equate to one having or possessing authentic street knowledge. But for all of that, what emerges from what I just got through describing is the ability to have sight beyond sight, far beyond sight, which is also the title and topic of this episode, which this thumbnail for this particular show is symbolizing, where the distinguished gentleman on this image, who is decked out in this purple pinstripe suit, has elevated himself to a greater field of view, which symbolizes him possessing this sight beyond sight capability, which can only happen to the degree by how efficient a practitioner has sidestepped and avoided succumbing to naive realism, which this wall on this image that's now showing is also symbolizing. And I will get to exactly what is naive realism here in a moment. Now, a added benefit that comes along with this Jedi type capabilities, this sight beyond sight expertise, just like this image is portraying, is the fact that women is instinctively attracted to men who carry and command this Jedi type dexterity, which because of the wisdom and clarity it provides, it adds novelty and wonder to a woman's life, mainly due to the fact that a woman's cycle and its hormonal makeup, which facilitates at times a certain disposition, which has a highly cooperative and coachable dynamic about itself, entices a woman organically to be attracted to such a man who possesses this type of prowess and dexterity I'm talking about. It's central though to the functionality and for it to hit on all cylinders, this sight beyond sight expertise, but a practitioner to utilize this force multiplier, a practitioner must have the know-how to squeeze and milk a indispensable and precious commodity, which can't be grabbed or held in one's hand, but when it runs out, the absence, its existence, or lack thereof is bluntly obvious and made clear cut. And this is time. But to fully utilize this sight beyond sight expertise I'm speaking about, one must have a thorough comprehension of this mysterious commodity so it can be maximized to one's benefit and to one's advantage. But I would get to this key centerpiece and irreplaceable prized possession and how many is underutilizing its power here momentarily. In stark contrast to this practicing gameologist that's in this image, a lot of men have been indoctrinated and have been fed consistently a bill of goods by the status quo, the square segment of society, where they have bought into this naive realism. I mentioned this earlier, remember? And I highlighted that this is a major stumbling block that hinders and interferes with a man's maturity and his overall manliness. You see, naive realism from a gameologist's point of view doesn't adhere to a smooth and coherent mental space and time continuum. that gives a practitioner a already though type of swag and confidence, as this image is demonstrating. So let me decipher real quick how the flip side, the disparaging side of this already though type attitude plays out and materializes. What I just brought up about smoothness and coherence. Remember though, that coherence is a requirement for one to have legitimate street knowledge. I pointed this out earlier along with the other two principles. So here's the deal. Let's further scrutinize this image and dive in and go a little bit deeper. I pointed this out earlier already, that naive realism is consistently spoon-fed to many of men in their psyche. Of course by the status quo. But as you look at this image, zero in on the first sketch and portrait that starts on the left. This first sketch of this individual with the question mark hovering over his head. You see, it takes observational skills to establish a legitimate and high standard question in one's head, which in turn provides the spark that torches and sets off the proper explosion and aha incentives that will provide the answers and determine the actual conciseness from which one can then have an impact in establishing if something is within the bounds of possibility or not. Now, once one has clearly pinpointed what is necessary, this gives the GPS coordinates to what one can actually add to their win column and put verifiable numbers on the scoreboard that contributes to their own success, which is all set into motion first and foremost by the quality of one's evidence-based perceiving and observational capabilities. Because a man's observational skills, or the lack thereof, establishes the backbone and sturdiness in attaining this already though type attitude. So when a man's observational prowess have been tainted and distorted by this naive realism, it produces a lot of unintentional errors for a man to contend with, which inserts itself into his evaluating tactics, arrangements on doing X, Y, and Z, and the overall should I or shouldn't I spectrum that a man uses to navigate at times treacherous landscapes which make up this chessboard we call life. As a consequence of what I just got through describing, men who fall up under this kind of infliction, this naive realism, seasoned OGs will refer to guys like this as space cadets, who for the most part is chronically off kilter, which in turn makes their judgment lopsided, inexact, and off center. Still yet, I said earlier, remember that I will divulge how this centerpiece, this irreplaceable form of currency and capital called time, is erroneous, mishandled, and greatly misunderstood. And because of this naiveness about this precious commodity, this leads to the non-fulfillment and straight out failure of implementing this sight beyond sight expertise I've been talking about. Now, those of you who are very perceptive would have noticed that the concept called game has a strong hustling ethos and rules of conduct underlining its philosophy and its line of reasoning, evident by one of its main creeds and articles of conduct that says, purse first, ass last. Especially when one elevates into the levels of participating at the third level. This level signifies a type of temperament that points to being a lieutenant, as this image of the 7 levels of game is symbolizing. But this ethos on hustling, which underlines the very structural underpinnings of this craft, is an indication on the severity that this street philosophy encourages a practitioner to properly leverage and manage their capital and resources. You see, those who are frequent viewers of the Chronicles of Gameology already know I use the prestige of being a chess player to indicate that it's the same intellectual prowess that takes to successfully play the game of chess can be applied to this street philosophy. As this image is showing, It's four forms of capital, going back to the hustler's ethos that I mentioned earlier. But these four forms of capital is a necessity for a thorough chess player to successfully navigate their way across a chessboard. So a chess player needs to leverage and make the most out of these four treasures and resources. And as you can see, one of these forms of leverage is this mysterious concept called time. Reasoning from the very facts that I have just laid out. And check out this new image I'm showing at this moment. Now, the concept of time from the school of thought and standpoint of the street philosophy is categorized in two broad categories. The category that I want to bring to your attention pivots around viewing the concept of time as like it was an arrow. As this image is clearly demonstrating, the concept of time acts somewhat straightforwardly and unbending, like I said, similar to an arrow. Therefore, starting on the left side of this image, time can give off the impression that it has a backwards existence, a past, that constitutes a all snap kind of mentality, whereas the current concept of time, the right now, constitutes a I'm about it kind of attitude. And lastly, time as it deals with the future is conceived as having a exit strategy way of thinking of what's coming down the pipe. However, with all of this what I just laid out, this breakdown of how time plays out from the point of view of the street philosophy has to do with how this whole configuration of what you are looking at plays into the betterment and full functionality of this sight beyond sight expertise. So a man attains a substantial quality of power, managing and leveraging his sense of personal time. And his personal conception of time is made possible by the combination of his material comforts and where it sits in relations to his material agitations. I spoke extensively on these two factors in another episode. Here's the link. Check it out once you finish viewing this episode. But if these two factors are managed properly, a man can tap into this sight beyond sight expertise for the very fact that the brain will develop a forward-leaning outlook that will consistently look ahead, making the tip of this arrow a man's exit strategy, organized and properly line up with these two other time considerations, giving him somewhat like a foreshadowing, a sizing up what can come next capability. In conclusion, the prizes and victories which brings about a sense of fulfillment in a man's life is positioned at the end of a clearly thought out chess move and conciseness of objectives. All of this gets this spunk and giddy up from how well a man has used this precious commodity called time. And what stands over supervising all of this is a man's efficiency at recognizing where legitimate knowledge leaves off and where naive realism, this ignorance, picks up and begins. Now that's checkmate. Thanks for watching. We'll definitely catch you on the next episode.